China would have a major advantage over the US in the event of a World War III scenario over Japan, an Asian policy expert warned. Chinese authorities have reportedly warned crews to stay away from the Senkaku Islands to avoid further tension with Tokyo. It came as Japan said it would respond if Chinese fishing vessels returned to the waters around the disputed chain of islands after Beijing's summer fishing ban in the East China Sea expired on Sunday. Earlier this month, Japanese Defence Minister Taro Kono said his country's self-defense forces would act firmly when necessary if Chinese vessels intensify their activities around the Diaoyu Islands, which Japan controls and calls the Senkakus. The Senkaku Islands, all of which are uninhabited, have long been the cause of sour China-Japan ties. Sean King, Senior Vice President of Park Strategies in New York and an affiliated scholar at University of Notre Dame's Liu Institute, that the islands would likely be the single source of any armed conflict in the region. Japan is a pacifist country, a policy that was written into its constitution shortly after it surrendered as an imperial power in 1947. Then, in 1960, the US officially committed itself to protecting Japan from any impending danger, this danger in decades past having taken the form of China. Senkakus have long since been a point of contention, with both China and Japan laying historical claim to them. Japan currently controls the 8 landmasses, and it is widely thought that if China were to attempt to capture them, the US would step in. However, as Mr. King explained, this isn't to say that the US would be successful, as China would essentially have a home advantage. He said, the US has 50,000 troops in Japan, most of whom are in Okinawa, which is nearby. It has 23,000 troops in South Korea who could be called on in case of contingency, and however many hours away the US has more troops in Hawaii and Guam. America's military power is still bigger than China's. Added to this is the fact we've got more wartime and experience, Iraq, Afghanistan, and everywhere else. But one problem is that we'd be fighting in China's backyard, not here. So China has the advantage of being on home turf almost, or at least almost on home turf. China would be fighting much closer to home, so they'd have an advantage there. Sean King would think in a spat over the Senkaku Islands depending on the situation, and the US would be in a position to defend Japan. US intervention may not only be bound in its commitment to Japan. The islands are also key because they are close to shipping lanes, offer rich fishing grounds and lie near potential oil and gas reserves. They're also in a strategically significant position, amid rising competition between the US and China for military primacy in the Asia-Pacific region. With the most recent reported move by China to steer clear of the islands, many have noted it coincides with worsening relations with the US. The Japanese news agency Kyodo has reported that Chinese fishing fleets have been told not to approach the Diaoyus after the ban is lifted. Fishing crews said they had been told by the authorities in the southeastern provinces of Fujian and Zhejiang not to come within 30 nautical miles, or 56 kilometers, of the uninhabited islands. While, with the US announcement that it will begin supplying weapons to Vietnam, rising tensions on the South China Sea, and an almost certain deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System in South Korea, it was nearly a certainty that China was going to make a big strategic move. Now, according to a report by The Guardian, China is poised to do just that by sending their Jin-class boomers on nuclear deterrent patrols in the Pacific for the very first time. This comes as the US intelligence services have also predicted that such a patrol would occur this year. As a reluctant nuclear player, has become much more militarily assertive over the last decade. Its love for ballistic missiles has also blossomed along with its extraterritorial ambitions, with a seemingly constant flow of new missile types and capabilities being developed for and fielded by PLA forces. These medium-range and short-range ballistic missile systems, which include anti-ship ballistic missiles, have been largely focused on imposing a regional area denial and anti-access defensive strategy. A much smaller arsenal of ground-based intercontinental ballistic missiles or ICBMs of widely varying capabilities DF-4, DF-5, makes up the backbone of China's nuclear deterrent. With this in mind, ranging their ballistic missile submarines far to the east into the Pacific represents a much more threatening strategic capability than anything Beijing has at its fingertips today. China's quartet of Type 94 Jin-class submarines have been viewed as more of a sea-based deterrent development program than a fully operational capability. They have gone on sporadic regional patrols, but these were likely developmental in nature and the boats were most likely unarmed or at least not fully armed at the time. Now, if this report is accurate, it would seem that the Jin class and its JL-2 submarine launched ballistic missiles. Each boat carries 12 are ready to conduct an operational long-range deterrent patrol. Such a move will drastically up the ante when it comes to China's first and second nuclear strike capabilities. In executing a long-range patrol, the Jin-class submarine would leave the relatively crowded and highly surveyed waters of the South China Sea. Although this means it will be operating far from its home at the massive Yulin Naval Base located on Hainan Island, a factor that will increase operational risk, its ability to hide in vastness of the Pacific will lend credibility to China's undersea nuclear strike mission. It would also provide far better survivability should hostilities break out, and most importantly, it would be far closer to targets on the American mainland. Obviously, monitoring these submarine patrols will be an absolute priority of the US and its allies in the region, a requirement that will only stretch the US Navy's limited nuclear fast attack submarine force even more. The Jin class is thought to be nowhere near as quiet as other modern boomers, but that doesn't mean it can't disappear, especially in the vastness of the Pacific. At the very least, these boats will tie up incredibly valuable US Navy resources anytime they are on patrol. China is supposedly slated to receive 5 Jin-class boats in all. This should give them the ability to keep 1 to 2 of these boomers on patrol at any given time, and possibly surge a third during times of heightened tensions. There are rumors that a follow-on boomer development project with significant improvements in acoustic signature and weapons carrying capability is already underway in China. This new design, dubbed the Type 096, will likely present a much more challenging target for American and Allied forces to keep tabs on if it becomes operational. It has taken decades for China to get to this point in its ballistic missile submarine program. Now with territorial disputes in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea, where American allies and America itself are directly opposing China's will, and the increase in anti-ballistic missile systems in the region, such a change in Beijing's nuclear posture is almost predictable. This is especially true considering China's nuclear deterrent is relatively tiny, about 300 warheads and almost entirely land-based, making it vulnerable to preemptive attack. This strategic vulnerability only increases the necessity of a second strike nuclear capability, which boomers provide. China could also move to increase its nuclear weapons stockpile in the near future and is already working to deploy their land-based ICBMs in more creative and survivable ways to avoid destruction during a first strike scenario. Russia is also executing a similar strategy. Whether a Jin-class boat goes on a long-range deterrent patrol today or a year from now, clearly China is reacting militarily to increasingly hostile relations with the US and its regional allies. The unsettling thing is that with more nuclear weapons forward deployed, the chances for mistakes and accidents only increase. Although China is a much more rational actor, and its submarine technology far more mature than, say, North Korea's, operational nuclear ballistic missile submarine patrols are still a relatively new concept for the People's Liberation Army Navy, and that makes the thought of its boomers prowling the Pacific especially concerning.